The camera slowly pulls back to reveal, in all its glory, the brand new kitchen of Bill and Belinda Pulver, a true architectural masterpiece located in Sydney's prestigious suburb of Mosman. The modern mansion was built on the foundation of the Pulver family's old home and captivates with its seemingly floating concrete walls. Enormous floor-to-ceiling windows offer breathtaking views over Taylor's Bay. Angus Pulver, the couple's son, returns home from training, and Belinda offers him something to eat while his parents showcase the home's new design for sandcastles, a television program about architecture and design. But just one day after the television crew packed up their cameras and left, the upstairs kitchen and living room became the scene of a crime unlike anything in modern Australian history. Madeline Pulver, the couple's 18-year-old daughter, was sitting in the kitchen, taking a short break from studying for her final HSC exams, when an intruder entered the mansion. He placed an explosive collar around the teenager's neck and demanded a ransom for her life. On the afternoon of Wednesday, August 3rd, 2011, Madeline, or Maddie, Pulver was home alone. Her father was at work, her mother was out shopping, her two younger brothers were at school, and her older brother was away on vacation. With only a few months of school remaining, Maddie took advantage of the quiet and solitude in the house to focus on exam preparation. But shortly after 2 p.m., she was abruptly interrupted. Hearing a faint noise, the girl turned around and saw a man entering the kitchen. He was wearing a ski mask that covered his entire face except for his eyes. It wasn't an ordinary mask. It was brightly striped and featured a smiling mouth. It would have been less frightening if it had been plain black. The mask terrified Maddie, perhaps even more than the black aluminum baseball bat the stranger was carrying. She jumped to her feet and backed away from him. "I'm not gonna hurt you," he said. Maddie asked what he wanted and what he was doing in her house. The man led her into the living room, told her to sit down, and promised that if she obeyed, nobody would get hurt. Maddie could hardly believe what was happening. She was frightened and had no idea what this stranger intended to do to her, but she remained calm enough to study him carefully and remember several important details. He was wearing beige trousers and a blue office shirt, clothing more suited to desk work than breaking into someone's home. He still had the ski mask on, but Maddie remembered his eyes through the openings in the balaclava. His eyes looked tired and dull, and the skin around them was lined with fine wrinkles. She estimated that he might have been around 50 years old, perhaps slightly older. Meanwhile, the stranger took a small black backpack he had brought with him and removed a rectangular box. It was about the size of an iPad and several centimeters thick. He pulled out a chain resembling a bicycle lock and used it to secure the box around Maddie's neck. Then he placed a purple cord around her neck with a note attached to it. After finishing, the man ordered Maddie to count to 200 before calling for help. He told her he was nearby and watching her and warned that disobedience would have consequences. Then the man, who was later found to have simply entered through an unlocked door, fled. But Maddie didn't know that. Believing he could still be hiding somewhere inside the 3-story house or in the garden, she obediently began counting. After reaching 200, she tried shouting, but nobody heard her. Moving as carefully as possible, she found a phone and called her father, telling him she had become a hostage in her own home and that he needed to call the police. Only after that did she unfold the note hanging from the cord around her neck. To her shock and horror, it turned out to be a 2-page letter in which the stranger explicitly forbade contacting the police. But by then, she had already asked her father to call them. She had no idea what the note contained, and her instinct had simply been to reach out to her parents. Realizing she had disobeyed the criminal only intensified her panic. When police arrived at the house, they were stunned by what they saw. It appeared that the device around the girl's neck was a real bomb collar, and the purple cord carried a ransom demand. Never before in modern Australian history had police dealt with a crime like this. Their first priority was to evacuate neighboring homes and close the road leading past the family mansion. Once such a massive police presence converged on one neighborhood, evacuating residents and closing roads, it became impossible to keep the situation hidden from journalists for long. 2 terrifying words, bomb collar, immediately appeared in news headlines around the world. At first, however, reporters knew almost nothing beyond the fact that the hostage was a high school senior preparing for an important graduation exam. Speculation quickly spread that Maddie had staged the whole thing herself with the help of a friend, and that the bomb threat had been her own idea. But once the shocking details emerged, nobody doubted any longer that the situation was deadly serious and that human lives were at stake. Not to mention, things like this simply do not happen in Australia. The country and much of the world followed the unfolding events. Some journalists covering the case compared it to a Hollywood movie, but for the family involved, this was reality. And so were the bomber's demands. In a rather unusual 2-page letter, he wrote, "A small portable case secured with a combination lock has been delivered to you. Inside it is a powerful advanced plastic explosive compound. The case is protected by an anti-tamper mechanism. It can only be opened safely by following instructions. To remove any doubt, I am a former military ordnance specialist from the United States Army Special Forces, the Green Berets, and I have been constructing devices of this nature for more than 20 years. Therefore, action first, questions later. Otherwise, you may unintentionally trigger a tragic and preventable explosion known within the U.S. military as the death of Brian Douglas Wells. Under no circumstances attempt to cut any wires leading to the device. Under no circumstances attempt to open the case. Under no circumstances press any of the 4 buttons more than 3 consecutive times. Do not expose the case to excessive moisture. Under no circumstances heat, cool, or X-ray the device. Do not ask anyone to help open it. Any violation will immediately result in an event similar to the death of Brian Douglas Wells. If you disclose to police, the FBI, any federal or government agency, or anyone outside your family, these instructions, any future instructions, correspondence, payment details, or any other information related to this matter, whether contained here or elsewhere, this will immediately result in an event similar to the death of Brian Douglas Wells. Once you confirm receipt of this letter, detailed instructions will be provided regarding the transfer of a specified amount. If you, the transferring party, or the sending bank attempt in any way to communicate to the receiving bank or any third party, directly or indirectly, information not strictly necessary for processing the transfer, this will result in an event similar to the death of Brian Douglas Wells regardless of whether payment is received. If I or my banking consultant or embedded informants become aware that you, your family, or anyone else violated any condition before or after payment, you proceed entirely at your own risk. If the transfer instructions are followed correctly and payment is confirmed, I will immediately provide the combination capable of opening the case without causing an event similar to the death of Brian Douglas Wells, and the integrated key necessary to fully disable the explosive mechanism inside. Confirm receipt of these instructions by contacting Dirk Struan. So the most important point was this. The extortionist explicitly confirmed that the device attached to Maddie's neck was indeed intended to be a bomb collar. He described himself as a former U.S. Army Green Beret, something that might either provide investigators with a lead or simply serve to misdirect them. Detectives did not yet know which, but they immediately understood the reference to the death of Brian Douglas Wells. Brian made a living delivering pizzas. During what appeared to be a routine delivery, conspirators placed a bomb collar around his neck and gave him instructions to rob a bank. He entered the bank carrying a cane disguised as a firearm and demanded money while wearing the explosive device. He obtained less than $9,000 but was stopped shortly afterward by police. Tragically, the bomb exploded before bomb disposal officers could arrive, killing him in front of stunned officers and television news crews. The people responsible were eventually arrested. They were identified as Marjorie Deal Armstrong and Kenneth Barnes. Marjorie received a life sentence while her accomplice was sentenced to 45 years in prison. In a particularly bizarre twist, the bank robbery had been organized to obtain money to pay for the murder of Marjorie's father. It remains one of the more unusual and complicated criminal cases in recent history, and Netflix later released a documentary miniseries about it titled Evil Genius. So, after threatening catastrophe, the unknown man who placed the device on Maddie's neck concluded his message by promising instructions for disarming the mechanism and preventing an explosion, but only if his demands were met. Communication with the extortionist was to continue through the email address he provided. Determined not to overlook any opportunity, police sent an email posing as Maddie's father and asked for further instructions. No reply ever came. Naturally, police examined the device attached to Maddie's neck and concluded that it had been constructed professionally. The perpetrator had concealed the supposed explosive inside a small portable gun safe secured with a combination lock. Bomb disposal officers, explosive ordnance specialists, and forensic experts all inspected the device, but they were left puzzled. They could not determine what was inside or identify the type of explosive the bomber might have used. Even though this was the police force of New South Wales, Australia's most populous state, officers openly admitted they had never dealt with an explosive collar before. Rather than attempting to solve the problem alone, they reached out to anyone who might be able to help. Negotiators were called in. Fire crews were brought to the scene. Major crime investigators joined the operation. Police even contacted specialists connected to the British Army for advice on how to proceed. While the extortionist's letter was taken to a laboratory for fingerprint analysis, experts continued examining the device as Maddie patiently remained seated for hour after hour. First, they scanned the device using X-ray equipment, but learned nothing conclusive. Then a handler carefully led over Toby, a detection dog trained specifically to identify explosives, hoping he could detect explosive compounds inside the box. Toby gave no indication that explosives were present. At the same time, police explored other possibilities. They asked a female officer to act as Maddie. A portable safe containing explosives, and designed to resemble the one attached to Maddie's neck, was secured around the officer's neck. Investigators wanted to recreate the conditions the victim was experiencing to better understand how they might safely remove the device. Throughout all of this, Maddie sat bravely, hoping to hear something that might finally bring good news. The strain was not only emotional, but physical. Her entire body hurt because she was barely allowed to move. Although she was given water and apparently something to eat, the device hung heavily from her neck. She could not change position and became increasingly exhausted. The teenager was drained and was not even allowed to speak with her parents or brothers, whom police understandably kept at a safe distance. They could do nothing but worry about their daughter and sister from afar. But she was not alone. One courageous young woman stayed beside Maddie the entire time, doing everything she could to comfort her, without wearing any protective equipment. Constable Karen Loudon was herself a wife and mother to a 2-year-old son. She understood exactly what Maddie's parents must have been feeling. She also understood that everything could go wrong at any moment, for both herself and Maddie. Yet she chose to remain beside the teenager, trying to calm and distract her. She asked about school, family, friends, exams. In short, she talked about anything at all, anything to keep Maddie's thoughts away from the weight hanging around her neck. Finally, 10 hours after the stranger had entered the Pulver family home, specialists decided to attempt removing the device. They had repeatedly examined the small safe that supposedly contained explosives. It had been X-rayed multiple times. A trained explosive detection dog had inspected it. Everything pointed to the conclusion that there was no dangerous substance inside. Even so, this was not an easy decision. The world watched anxiously as events unfolded, and certainly no one felt that tension more than the Pulver family and Maddie herself. It is difficult to imagine the thoughts circling through her mind during those 10 hours. Most of us have seen scenes like this in movies, but imagining something like that happening to you at any moment, that is a nightmare. Around midnight, specialists carefully removed the device from Maddie's neck, and with enormous relief discovered they had been right. It was a fake, a decoy, but the fear Maddie experienced had been completely real. Exhausted, Madeline Pulver was carried out of the house on a medical stretcher and taken to hospital, where doctors examined her. Her deeply relieved family was finally allowed to see her. At around 3 in the morning, doctors cleared Maddie to return home. According to her parents, she woke up the next day in surprisingly good spirits considering everything she had endured, though understandably, her entire body still ached. Once the immediate danger to Maddie had passed, detectives turned their attention to the investigation. First, they interviewed the teenager's parents. Investigators did not believe the family had been selected at random and assumed there had to be a motive, but the Pulvers themselves could not understand why they had become targets. Bill was the chief executive officer of a major analytics company. Belinda ran a landscape design business. Their children, Harry, Maddie, Angus, and Archie, were still in school. So yes, they were a well-off family. But they had never flaunted their wealth and were far from being the wealthiest or the only affluent family in Mossman. Even so, police increasingly believed whoever planned the attack had prepared in advance. The offender, or offenders, appeared to have selected their victims and monitored the house for days, perhaps weeks. They knew the family had a habit of leaving the front door unlocked. After all, Mossman was considered an exceptionally safe neighborhood, and they also knew that Maddie would be home completely alone, because it seemed difficult to believe the intruder had simply gotten lucky and happened to choose the one moment when 5 out of 6 family members would be absent. Officers thoroughly searched the house for clues, but it appeared that the best evidence had been left directly in front of them. The extortion letter, the device itself, and a green USB flash drive the offender had left behind at the scene. Let's begin with the email address listed in the letter. Of course, Dirk Struan is a fictional name, and it was not invented by the criminal. It was created by the well-known writer James Clavell, whose other famous works include Shogun and Noble House. In 1966, he published the novel Taipan, whose protagonist was Dirk Struan, a Scottish opium trader and founder of a powerful trading company in Hong Kong. A gifted, ruthless, and visionary figure known as the Green-Eyed Devil, Struan sought to make both his family and his company the most influential force in Asia. He is a deeply ambiguous character, more antagonist than hero, yet endowed with enough admirable qualities to make readers fascinated by him. A fake bomb, a fictional literary character. At first, it looked as though the entire thing might be some elaborate joke. But then investigators discovered that the email account itself was very real. It had been created only a few months earlier, on May 30th, at Chicago Airport. For the moment, at least, all the references to the United States appeared to fit together. The account had only been accessed 3 times since its creation, and all 3 runs occurred on the day of the attack on Maddie. But not from America. They came from Australia, from the Central Coast region, roughly an hour north of Sydney. The first login occurred at around 4 p.m. from the parking lot of Kincumber Library. 2 hours later, the account was accessed again from the parking lot of an electronics store in the town of Avoca. Fortunately for investigators, both locations had surveillance cameras, and unusually enough, they were working. The footage captured a man arriving first at the library and later at the second location in a gold-colored Range Rover. He remained in the vehicle while accessing the email account using a laptop. But in Avoca, he stepped out of the car and walked into a liquor store to buy wine. He appeared to be between 50 and 60 years old, and he was dressed in beige trousers and a blue shirt, exactly as Maddie had described. The cameras did not capture the vehicle's registration plate, but they did capture the make, color, and the driver. And what about the USB drive the offender left behind? At first glance, it seemed to contain nothing more than a copy of the 2-page extortion letter. There were also several deleted drafts of the same document. But when investigators examined hidden document metadata, they made an unexpected discovery. The files had been created on a computer belonging to a user identified as Paul P. Now investigators had a name, a computer type, and even a blurred image associated with this Paul P. At that point, it seemed like only a matter of time before he would be caught. You might ask, why leave the flash drive at all? It contained no additional information that the offender appeared to consider necessary. I don't have an answer, and, as events would later suggest, Paul himself may not have had one either. Given everything they had gathered, it did not take police long to identify a man living in the Central Coast suburb of Copacabana. His name was Paul Douglas Peters. He was 50 years old, an investment banker, and an aspiring writer. His appearance resembled the man captured on surveillance footage. The final piece of evidence came when investigators confirmed that Paul had purchased the USB drive and the purple cord on July 4th. Then, on July 16th, surveillance footage showed him buying a black baseball bat and a brightly colored ski mask from a JJ's store. Incidentally, JJ's later removed the mask from sale. Police wanted to arrest him immediately, but there was one small complication. Paul was no longer in Australia. On August 8th, just 5 days after his encounter with Maddie, he had left the country and flown to the United States, to Kentucky. Naturally, such a sudden departure made him look even more suspicious. Airport surveillance footage in Sydney confirmed that Paul had boarded the flight and departed for America. His destination was Louisville, Kentucky. Why there? Because his former wife, Deborah Lee Peters, lived there with their 3 children. The couple had divorced back in 2007, but remained on good terms. Roughly 2 weeks after the events in Mosman, detectives traveled to Kentucky to arrest the suspect and return him to Australia. A tactical team assisted in taking him into custody without incident. Inside the house, officers found a copy of Tai-Pan, one more detail suggesting that Paul was at the very least familiar with the novel. Who was Paul Peters? He was roughly the same age as Maddie's father, and like Bill, he had once been a successful businessman. But several years earlier, financial problems had begun to unravel his life and eventually contributed to his divorce. After the collapse of both his marriage and business, he struggled with depression and began turning to alcohol. The one thing that seemed to give him purpose was a book he was writing. He had never previously had trouble with the law. Nothing in his past appeared to suggest he would commit such an extraordinary crime. During initial questioning, he denied responsibility and described everything as a terrible coincidence. But before trial, he unexpectedly pleaded guilty, sparing Maddie and her family from having to endure a long and emotionally exhausting court process. But during the trial, the man claimed that he could not remember committing the crime. He remembered being in the Sydney neighborhood where the family lived. He even remembered walking up the steps to their house. But the next thing he knew, he was already back home. However, he admitted to a psychiatrist that he believed he had become a living embodiment of the protagonist of the novel he had been writing at the time, a character resembling Dirk Struan, the central figure of Tai-Pan. Paul suggested that he committed the crime while under the influence of this obsession. He had become consumed by the novel and felt as though he was literally living the life of his character. Immersed in the role and imagining himself as a powerful and dangerous antagonist, he decided to carry out such an audacious crime. At the same time, he had never met nor personally known any member of the Pulver family. He said he did not know why he had chosen them. But the prosecutor dismissed this explanation and argued that Paul Peters had invented the story about memory loss to preserve his dignity instead of admitting that his plan had simply failed. The prosecution believed his intended target had actually been the Pulver's neighbor, a man with whom Paul had previously conducted business in Hong Kong. According to this theory, the would-be extortionist had simply gone to the wrong house. The prosecutor was convinced because during questioning, Paul had mentioned a fund in which he claimed $12 million of his assets had been frozen. And one of the 3 deleted files recovered from the flash drive contained extortion demands directed toward a person connected to that fund. So it is possible that Maddie had never been the intended victim, and that Paul originally planned to enter the neighbor's house, a man associated with a multi-million-dollar trust. However, one question remained unresolved. The device looked so convincing that even experts initially believed it could be deadly. Did Paul really build it himself? Because doubts about that still exist today. Where would an investment banker learn to construct something that convincing? Did he simply find instructions online? No definitive answer ever emerged. In the end, the court agreed with the prosecution. Paul was sentenced to 13.5 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after serving 10 years. After sentencing, Maddie told reporters that she was satisfied with the outcome and hoped Paul Peters' name would no longer remain permanently tied to hers. She emphasized that the sentence itself mattered less to her than knowing he would never repeat an attack like this. She also said she appreciated that the judge acknowledged the trauma inflicted on both her and her family. Paul publicly apologized to Maddie. She never responded. But her father, Bill Pulver, explained that his daughter suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder and that encountering her attacker face-to-face somewhere in Sydney would be extremely difficult. For that reason, when Paul was released in August 2021 after serving 10 years, restrictions were placed on where he could appear in order to avoid contact with Maddie. It took Maddie Pulver a long time to rebuild a sense of normal life. Even so, she successfully finished school and sat the final exam she had been preparing for on the day of the attack. After graduation, she took some time to travel before enrolling in the communications program at the University of Technology, Sydney. Later, she developed a passion for interior design, which became the field she continues to work in today. In 2022, During the Easter long weekend, she married her partner, Angus Wood, in a small ceremony surrounded by close family and friends. It was described as a beautiful celebration. Sometime later, Maddie and Angus became parents. Neither Maddie nor her family have given extensive interviews about what happened. Instead, they consistently direct attention toward the New South Wales police officers, whom they regard as the real heroes. They seem determined to leave the attack behind, and that is understandable. Every member of the family has achievements and a life beyond that day. And as Maddie herself once said, she does not want her name to be associated only with Paul Peters and his fake bomb. As for another remarkably brave woman, Constable Karen Loudon, she was awarded the Star of Courage in recognition of her actions on the day of the crime.